In this session, we look at the Hong Kong primary English curriculum. And I will be referring to the current official English language curriculum for primary schools, published by the Education Bureau in 2004. So what do we teach when we teach English as a second language? Now, you may still recall that in the last session, I asked you to define the successful second language learner. And many of you came up with the observation that the successful second language learner is someone who can communicate fluently and accurately in the target language. Now, what do we mean by communicate? Usually when we think about the word communicate, immediately the two skills, speaking and writing, will come to mind. But in second language teaching, we have a broader concept of communicate, so that communicate is not just speaking and writing. Communicate also involves listening and also reading. Now, if we think about the final goal of second language teaching, which is to enable learners to communicate in the target language through listening, speaking, reading, and writing. So the successful second language learner is not just someone who knows a lot about the target language. And for this reason, when we talk about second language curriculum, we don't often simply look at what to teach, but we also think about how to teach. So when we think about what to teach, that is more to do with the curriculum itself. And when we think about how to teach, we are more into the methodology. When we think about how to teach, the traditional method of chalk and talk is probably very familiar to you, but chalk and talk is not the only, and in fact probably not the most effective method to teach a second language. A number of methods have appeared on the second language methodology scene, but currently the paradigm in second language methodology is called CLT, which stands for Communicative Language Teaching. So the main goal of communicative language teaching is to enable students to communicate in the target language. Now, there are different ways to do communicative language teaching, and in the Hong Kong primary English curriculum, the advocated way to do communicative language teaching is called task-based learning. Now, why task-based learning? The rationale behind is that people don't learn a second language simply by listening to teacher. Instead, they have to work through tasks so that they have a chance of acquiring the language. So when someone has acquired a second language, then they can use it for successful communication. But a task is not just anything that we get learners to do, but something that satisfies certain criteria. So now let's look at some criteria for a language learning task. Now, different writers have proposed different criteria for successful language learning tasks. And this example is taken from the 2004 primary English curriculum, which states that a good learning task should have a purpose should have a context, should involve learners in a mode of thinking and doing, should require learners to draw upon the framework of knowledge and skills in the process, and also engage learners in carrying out a purposeful activity leading towards a product. So if you ask students to complete a multiple choice exercise, then that doesn't count as a task. And that is also the reason why today when you enter an English language classroom, you don't often see a lot of lecturing, chalk and talk by the teacher, and instead you often see students working on tasks in small groups. Now, what exactly is a task? Now, let's look at one example taken from the 2004 Primary English Curriculum. And this one is for Key Stage 2, meaning P4 to P6. So, in this task, the class reads an email from Marmalade, an imaginary new classmate from Mars. From the email, the class gets to know more about Marmalade, his family, his favorite leisure activities, the courses he has taken, and his traveling experience. Marmalade has asked the class some questions before his visit to Hong Kong. He wants to find out more about his future classmates. He also wants to know who will show him around. Now, through shared writing, the students will now draft a reply to answer Marmalade's questions and introduce themselves. Now, at this point, you may be wondering, okay, if English language teaching is to get students to work on tasks, then what about grammar? What about vocabulary? So when do we teach grammar? When do we teach vocabulary? Now, it isn't that under task-based learning we don't teach grammar, vocabulary anymore. It's just that under task-based learning we begin with a task, and then from the task we identify the language content, or what we call language objectives to teach. So now let's go back to the language objectives. Language objectives are identified under tasks. And the language objectives are skills such as listening, speaking, reading and writing, grammar, vocabulary, text types, phonics, communicative functions, and so on and so on. So under task-based learning, a teaching program, say for 1 year or 1 month or entire primary schooling, will look like this, consisting of a number of tasks. So students might be working through a whole series of tasks throughout the year. So how do we organize the tasks? Well, tasks are organized according to modules and units. So, for example, within a module, say module 1, there might be 2 units or 3. And a unit is like our traditional concept of a chapter in the Coursebook. So unit 1 is like chapter 1, unit 2 is like chapter 2, and so on and so on. And then inside unit 1 there might be 2 tasks, task A, task B, and so on. And unit 2, another 2 tasks, and so on. So these are how tasks are organized. At this point you might be wondering, so what about the modules, the units, the tasks themselves? So how are they derived? Now let's look at one example of a module. So if you look at this module, you will see that there are two units, Unit 1 and Unit 2, under the module Relationships. And if you look at units, the first unit, Getting to Know You, there are 3 tasks. Task 1 is first news from Marmalade. Task 2 is We Are the Best. Task 3 is hospital experience. And you will see that these 3 tasks, first news from Marmalade, We Are the Best, and hospital experience, are related to the general theme of getting to know you for this unit. And this theme, and also the theme for the next unit, Small, Small World, are both related to the more general theme of relationships. So in other words, modules, units, and tasks are organized, grouped thematically. And the next logical question to ask is, how are those themes selected? Well, they are selected according to 3 main purposes for using language. So, for example, we use language for interpersonal relationships. We use language to get knowledge. And then we also use language to express experience. So those themes are actually related to these 3 strands of the subject target. In other words, why are we learning English? Now let us look at some examples of text types, communicative functions, grammar items, and skills. Now in actual teaching, most teachers will be following a course book. And in Hong Kong, all course books have to be approved by the Education Bureau. And so the typical design for a course book unit, and remember that a unit is like the traditional chapter. So the design of a typical unit will be like this, right? It will begin with a reading passage, and then students will be introduced to the text type, and then they will be listening, reading, writing materials, and grammar will be taught, and new words will be taught as well, and sometimes communicative functions, and in the lower grades, phonics. And after all these have been dealt with, then the final thing to do in a unit is for students to complete the main task. In traditional textbooks, we have the so-called passages, but text types refers to the actual reading text that we encounter in real life, such as cartoons and comics, diaries, fables and fairy tales, personal recounts, poems, and so on and so on. So these text types have different formats. They also have different organizations of content. Communicative functions refers to the specific things that we want to do in certain social encounters, such as asking a person's name, such as asking and describing what people are doing, asking and telling the time and dates, and asking permission to do simple things. These are examples of grammar items, and you will be very familiar with them, right? But notice that instead of just specifying that students are to learn, say, the indefinite articles, in the primary English curriculum, the function for each grammar item is stated. So for example here we have using the indefinite articles a and n to refer to a person, animal, event, time, or object in general. And so similarly, we use the definite article the to refer to a specific person, animal, event, time, or object. And in terms of skills, well, you will remember that there are 4 sets of skills: listening, speaking, reading, and writing. And these are speaking skills for Key Stage 2. Key Stage 2 is P4 to P6. So let's just look at a couple of examples. Present information, ideas, and feelings clearly and coherently, using appropriate registers when speaking to familiar interlocutors such as teachers and peers. So in today's second language classrooms, we don't see much chalk and talk by the teacher, and instead you see students working busily on tasks, and through tasks they learn the grammar, the vocabulary, and then acquire the 4 skills.